$41,600. That's the number my in-laws stood up in front of the entire family and said I'd stolen from my father-in-law's account. I'm Naledi, 36, and I've spent 12 years as a bookkeeper reading other people's financial messes for a living, which is exactly why, even through the shock of hearing that number said out loud at a dinner table, some part of me thought, "Lady, you have no idea who you just accused." By the time this whole thing was actually over, that first number wasn't even the real one. It wasn't the last surprise either. For about 11 days, though, I genuinely thought that first number was going to end my marriage. Let me back up, because you need the full picture before I get to what those bank records actually said, and how many times what I thought I understood turned out to be wrong. I married into the Whitcombs 6 years ago. My husband Theo is the kind of steady, decent guy who grew up completely unaware that not every family runs on a low hum of financial panic dressed up as politeness. His dad, Bertrand, everybody calls him Bert, built a mid-sized landscaping and property maintenance company from a single truck 30 years ago. His mom, Rosalind, ran the front office most of that time. Bert's genuinely sweet, forgetful about his own birthday. Half the time still calls me the smart one whenever numbers come up at dinner. I actually met Bert before I met Theo. My very first year doing books for small businesses, one of my clients was a nursery 2 doors down from the Whitcomb offices, and Bert used to wander over some mornings for coffee and end up asking me questions about depreciation schedules completely unprompted. Months later, Theo asked me out, and it took me an embarrassingly long dinner to realize the Bert he kept mentioning was the same guy who used to bring me terrible gas station coffee and ask about equipment write-offs. Growing up, my own family didn't have much room for financial mistakes to be quiet ones. My mother raised 3 of us on a school cafeteria salary after my father left, and every dollar in our house got accounted for out loud at the kitchen table, no exceptions. That's probably half the reason I ended up doing this for a living. Numbers don't lie to you. People do sometimes, even the ones who love you, and usually because they think the lie is smaller than the truth would be. Theo's younger brother Callum took over day-to-day operations about 4 years back, when Bert's spine finally gave out and he had to step away. On paper, Callum ran a tight ship. In reality, I'd noticed things that didn't sit right almost a year before any of this blew up. A client mentioning a bill twice at a barbecue. A crew leader joking that payroll had been weird lately and changing the subject fast like he already regretted saying it. I even remember a 4th of July cookout where Callum showed up 2 hours late in a car. Nicer than anything he should have been able to afford on a landscaping manager's salary, laughed it off as a good deal on a lease, and nobody at that table asked a single follow-up question. I noticed. I just didn't say anything, because saying something felt like an accusation with nothing behind it yet. Here's the piece nobody in that family knew going into that dinner. I wasn't the Whitcombs' official bookkeeper. I do books for 11 small businesses around town, and Bert's company was never one of them on purpose. Theo and I agreed early that mixing family with my actual client work was a bad idea, which meant when the accusation landed, I had nothing to defend myself with. Just what I'd seen in passing helping Bert with a spreadsheet as a favor now and then. Keep that limitation in mind. It's going to matter more than once. The dinner was supposed to be nothing. Sunday, Rosalind's dining room pot roasts the same faded blue tablecloth she'd used for as long as I'd known this family. Bert seemed off that night, withdrawn, rubbing his temple like something was bothering him he didn't want to name. Rosalind kept shooting him tight little looks across the table. Then she set her fork down loud enough that the table went silent. Bert's accountant found something she said. Money's been moving out of his personal savings for 8 months. $41,600. Going into an account with your name on it, Naledi. I laughed for a second, thinking it had to be a mistake. Then I looked at Theo's face. Nobody else at that table thought it was funny. That's not possible, I said. I don't have any account connected to your family. Callum across from me didn't say a word, kept eating like the conversation was background noise. I remember that specifically the first time it occurred to me his silence had a different weight to it than everyone else's. An innocent person hearing a number like that usually leans in, Asks a question, wants details. Callum leaned back in his chair like he already knew exactly how this dinner was going to end. Rosalind slid a printed bank statement across the table, skimmed, cropped, highlighted in 3 places. Real account. Real transfers. My actual name in the account holder field. I had never seen it in my life. That's the part that took me longest to sit with. The account was real. My name was real. I had no idea it existed. Stick with me here because how my name ended up on money I never touched, and how much this story was still hiding underneath the number Rosalind chose to say out loud that night is exactly what the next part is about. I asked to see the full statement. Rosalind said her lawyer advised against sharing more until they figured out how to handle this as a family, which is a nicer way of saying we've already decided you're guilty, we're just deciding what to do about it. Theo didn't say much that night. I could tell he was trying to hold 2 things in his head at once: his mother's accusations, 6 years of actually knowing me, and they weren't lining up cleanly yet. In the car, I told him the truth. I had no idea what that account was, but I was going to find out because I wasn't spending the rest of this marriage with his family already deciding I was a thief. I couldn't legally touch Bert's accounts. What I could do was ask around carefully at the branch where I knew people through client work. That's where Yolanda comes in. 6 years on the personal banking desk. And when I mentioned casually that I was dealing with some confusing account stuff involving my in-laws, she went still in a specific way, the kind that means somebody's already noticed something and has been sitting on it. I probably shouldn't say anything she said. Then said something anyway. There's been some weird routing on a business account tied to that family name. Came up in an internal flag review a few months back. Didn't think much of it at the time. She didn't give me anything she legally couldn't. But that one sentence told me this went deeper than a savings account with my name stapled to it. This wasn't isolated. Something bigger was already moving through that family's finances, and the account I'd been accused over might just be the visible edge of it. 2 days after the dinner, Theo asked Callum directly if he knew anything about the account. Callum said no. Said it fast, a little too fast for someone hearing about a $41,000 mystery for the first time. I filed that away. So did Theo. I think even if neither of us said it out loud yet. By day 4, Rosalind had started calling around an aunt, a cousin, a few family friends, not accusing me outright to any of them. Just concerned. Just worried about Bert. Just enough breadcrumbs that by any family gathering, people were already looking at me differently. My sister-in-law's college roommate, someone I'd met exactly twice, sent me a message that just said, "Hope everything's okay," which told me the story had already traveled further than I could track. There was a moment on day 5 I still think about. Theo's cousin hosted a small backyard thing, nothing formal, and I almost didn't go. I went anyway because not showing up felt like an admission of something. I stood by the drink cooler for most of it while conversations quieted a beat too fast whenever I got close, then picked back up in a lower register once I'd walked past. Nobody said a word to my face. Nobody had to. Those 11 days were some of the worst of my marriage. Not because Theo turned on me, he didn't, not fully, but because I could watch him trying to hold 2 truths at once, and some mornings I genuinely didn't know which one was going to win. He started sleeping on his side of the bed differently. Small things, the kind you only notice when you're already looking for cracks. Bert called me on day 6. Not Theo. Not Rosalind, Bert himself. Tuesday afternoon, voice low like he didn't want anyone else in the house hearing him. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to not tell Rosalind I called." 8 months ago, he said he'd started noticing money missing from the business. Small at first, then not so small. He didn't want to believe what he was seeing. So instead of confronting anybody, he did something protective and frankly not very well thought out without telling a single person. He moved chunks of his own personal savings into a new account. He used my full legal name. It was the one name in that family he trusted completely, the one he was sure wouldn't touch it without asking him first. He just never told me he'd done it. "I was trying to protect it," he said. "I didn't think anyone would find the account or connect it to you. I made a mess of this, Naledi. I'm sorry." I asked him why he hadn't just told me from the start, back when he first opened it. He was quiet for a second, then said something I didn't expect. He said he'd assumed if he told me I'd have felt obligated to say something to Theo right away, and he wasn't ready yet to accuse his own son of anything, not until he actually knew for sure. He'd rather I found out the truth eventually than force a conversation none of us were ready to have. So the account was real. My name was real. I hadn't touched $1 of it. Bert had built the whole thing himself on his own as a shield. And the shield turned into a weapon the second his accountant flagged the transfers, and Rosalind saw my name attached. That answered one mystery. It cracked open a much bigger one, and it also meant the 41,000 Rosalind had waved around that dinner table wasn't even the real number. It was just the part Bert's accountant had happened to notice first. If Bert was moving his own savings to protect it, he believed something bigger was actually bleeding money out of the business itself, separate from anything sitting in his personal accounts. And the person running day-to-day operations for 4 years was Callum. I called Odalis Ray as my attorney, someone I trusted from a couple of client disputes before. Laid the whole thing out. She told me exactly what I could and couldn't do. I still had zero legal standing over the business's actual books. But Bert, as majority owner, absolutely did. If he authorized a formal audit, everything would be visible. No more guessing. No more second-hand statements passed around a dinner table. Bert agreed before I finished asking. Before the audit results came back, I did something I probably shouldn't admit to on camera, but I want to be honest about how this actually went. I drove out to the Whitcomb offices one afternoon, told the front desk I was dropping off a folder for Bert, and sat in my car in the lot afterward just watching. Not investigating, not exactly just needing to see the place with my own eyes before whatever was coming actually landed. I watched Callum's truck pull in 20 minutes late. Watched him sit in his own car for a solid 5 minutes before going inside exactly the way I'd been sitting in mine. I didn't know it yet, but we were both stalling in front of the same building for opposite reasons. The audit took 6 days. 6 days of Rosalind still telling people she was handling a delicate situation. 6 days of Theo going quieter, and me not saying a word to anyone until I actually had something real to say. I kept my head down at work. Took on an extra client I didn't really have room for just to have something to occupy the hours that weren't spent waiting. What the audit found. Over the same 8 months, Bert had been quietly protecting his savings. More than $60,000 had moved out of the business account in small, irregular transfers, nearly $20,000 more than the number that had been thrown at me across a dinner table. Vendor payments matching no actual vendor. Equipment purchases with no equipment to show for them. A recurring monthly charge routed through a shell entity that took Odalis's investigator 2 full days just to trace back to a real name. All of it authorized under Callum's operational sign-off. Odalis eventually traced a chunk of it to an online sportsbook account registered in his name with deposits that spiked every time a business payment cleared. The investigator, a quiet older man named Franklin who Odalis had worked with for years, told her something in passing that she later repeated to me. He said in his experience, numbers like this almost never start big. They start small enough that a person can convince themselves it isn't really stealing, just borrowing just this once. And by the time anyone notices the person doing it, has usually stopped being able to tell the difference themselves. There it was. Not me. Never me. My name had only ever landed on Bert's account because Bert trusted me. The real target of Rosalind's accusation had been sitting right there at that dinner table the whole time, eating pot roast, staying quiet every time the subject came up while the actual number kept climbing behind everyone's back. 2 days before the meeting, Odalis eventually called my aunt-in-law, Deb, Rosalind's own sister, said something to me over the phone that changed how I understood this whole family. This isn't the first time she said, almost like she assumed I already knew. 2 years earlier, she said Callum had come to Rosalind quietly asking for help with a mistake, and Rosalind had covered it herself out of her own savings and never told Bert. She hadn't been protecting the family from me at that dinner table. She'd been protecting Callum from Bert again the exact same way she'd done it once before, except this time the mistake was too big to cover quietly, so she'd needed someone else to blame instead. Me. I sat with that for a long time before I said anything to Theo. It reframed the entire 11 days. Rosalind hadn't been wrong about someone in that family lying to Bert. She'd just been the one lying to him the longest. Odalis called a meeting. Not a courtroom, this state of family matter, but a formal one in her conference room, everyone present, full audit report on the table. I want you to know how that room felt walking in. I wasn't nervous anymore. I'd spent 11 days being nervous. This was something else. This was just waiting. I remember what I wore that morning, which is a strange thing to remember, but I put on the blazer I usually save for client meetings where I have to explain something difficult to someone who won't want to hear it. It felt right. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. This was a meeting, and I'd decided I was going to treat it like one. Rosalind started before anyone even sat down properly. I assume this is your explanation for the account, she said already, halfway to a smirk. It is, I said. Bert opened it. He'll tell you himself. Bert did. Told the room everything he'd told me on the phone. The missing money, the account, my name. Only because he trusted it completely. Rosalind's face didn't move much. Her hands did. She gripped the edge of the table like she needed something solid to hold on to while the story she'd built for 11 days quietly came apart in front of her. Then Odalis slid the audit report across the table. Not to me, to Callum. We'd like you to walk us through these transfers, she said. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Callum, staring down at the pages, said the only true thing he'd said in 11 days. I was going to pay it back. That was it. The whole defense. Not, I didn't do it. Not, this is a mistake. Just, I was going to pay it back, the words of someone who already knew exactly what those numbers meant the moment he saw them laid out. Rosalind turned on him first, actually, before Theo even said anything. How much? She asked, voice cracking on the second word in a way I'd never heard from her before. Callum didn't answer. She asked again, louder. He still didn't answer, and something about that silence, his silence this time not mine, filled that whole conference room in a way the audit report alone hadn't managed to. Theo looked at his mother. You accused Naledi in front of the whole family before you even asked Dad one question, he said. You didn't check. You just needed it to be her instead of him. Again, Rosalind didn't have an answer for that either. It should have ended there. It didn't quite. 3 weeks later, going through the final paperwork with Odalis to close everything out properly, Franklin flagged a second account, smaller. Older, opened almost 2 years earlier, the same shell structure as the one that had just been caught. It matched exactly what Aunt Deb had described. The first mistake. Proof that this had never been a single lapse under pressure. It was a pattern Rosalind had helped build the cover for one quiet favor at a time, until the favors got too big to keep quiet. If you've ever been the easy person to blame in a family because you weren't born into it, because accusing you costs less than actually looking at the person they'd have to protect, I see you genuinely. It gets easier once the truth actually comes out. It does come out more often than people think. Bert didn't press charges. What did happen? Callum stepped down from operations, entered a structured repayment plan covering both accounts, now not just the one we'd found first, and started actual treatment for the gambling. Bert insisted on that part, the same low-key way he'd tried to protect his savings in the first place. He's not the type to make a scene out of consequences. He just makes sure they happen. That night, after everyone finally left the conference room, Theo and I sat in the car for a long time before either of us started driving. He apologized not for anything he'd said, but for how long it had taken him to fully believe me over his own mother, even when I'd never given him a reason to doubt me in 6 years. I told him I understood why it wasn't simple. She'd raised him. I'd only married him. It made sense that untangling the two took longer than 11 days, even if those 11 days had been some of the hardest of my life. Theo took over managing the books alongside a new operations manager Bert hired from outside the family, someone with no last name in common with any of us, which honestly felt like relief for everyone involved. I offered to help set up their new accounting system strictly as a professional favor, invoiced and everything. Bert insisted on paying full rate. said it was the least he owed me, and I didn't argue with him about it. Callum and I still haven't really talked not properly. He sent one text a few weeks after everything settled, just, "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough." And I didn't know what to say back for 2 full days. Eventually, I wrote "I know" and left it there. Some things don't need a longer conversation than that. Yolanda and I still grab coffee sometimes. I never told her how big a role that one careful sentence of hers ended up playing. I think she knows anyway. I still do my client books the exact same way I always have. Bert's company still isn't one of them, and after all this, I'm more grateful for that boundary than ever. Some lines are worth keeping, even when everyone around you is stepping over theirs. Rosalind, if you ever end up watching this, I don't need you to love me. I never did. I just needed you to stop building a case against me out of a story you never bothered to check, not once, not even the second time. You apologized eventually in your own stiff whey coffee you made yourself instead of asking me to. I noticed. I want you to know that. If there's one thing I actually took from those 11 days, it's this. People go looking for the easiest explanation, not the true one, especially inside families where the truth would cost them something. My name ended up on that account because a scared man trusted me. My in-laws turned that trust into an accusation because trusting me cost them nothing, and looking honestly at their own son and at what his mother had already been covering for him might have cost them everything, a lot more than the $41,000 they thought this was ever about. If any part of this hit close to home, if you've ever been the convenient person to blame in somebody else's family, while the real story quietly got covered up somewhere else, drop a comment and let me know. And if you liked watching someone get completely underestimated and then hand the truth right back to the people who never bothered to look for it themselves, watch my latest video next. You will not see how that one actually ends.